On the morning Ivan Kornevich understood he would not die yet, the river was flowing the wrong way. He noticed it while his face was pressed into the snow. The cold was so sharp it felt clean, almost abstract, like a thought without emotion. A boot rested between his shoulder blades, not crushing him, just present, reminding him that gravity had rules here and they were not negotiable. "Do not move," someone shouted, though Ivan had not tried to. Under the ice, the river shifted. Not downstream, as it should have, but sideways, no, upward, toward the bend where the bank rose and the spruce trees leaned like tired men. It was a subtle movement, visible only to someone who had once studied water for a living, who knew that rivers rarely disobeyed their own logic unless forced. Ivan smiled. The smile filled with snow. This is wrong, he thought. And because it was wrong, it stayed with him. They lifted him eventually. Hands grabbed his coat, his collar, his arms. He was pulled upright and shoved into a line of men who looked like shadows stitched together by frost. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered a prayer without moving his lips. A guard read numbers. Ivan's number sounded nothing like his name. By evening, the river was behind them. By night, it was already becoming something else in his memory, less a river, more a sign. He did not yet know what it signified. Only that he would need it later. The camp revealed itself without ceremony. No gates worthy of fear, no grand cruelty. Just barracks sagging under snow, watchtowers like thin fingers, wire disappearing into white distance. It smelled of smoke, wet wool, and something faintly metallic that Ivan recognized after a moment as fear that had learned to stay quiet. They were assigned bunks. Tools. Silence. On the first night, Ivan did not sleep. He lay on his back, counting breaths, not to calm himself, but to remain present. Men around him drifted in and out of coughing dreams. Someone cried softly, as if apologizing for the sound. Ivan closed his eyes and chose a memory. Not his arrest. That was too close, too sharp. Instead, a summer afternoon, years ago, standing knee-deep in water with measuring instruments strapped to his belt. The river warm then, slow, cooperative. He remembered the angle of sunlight, the smell of algae, the way numbers could explain movement without reducing its beauty. He reconstructed it carefully, as if rebuilding a bridge plank by plank. When the memory was complete, he let it rest. This, he decided, would be his work. The man who believed Major Gromov did not look like a camp commandant. Ivan noticed this immediately, and it unsettled him more than shouting would have. Gromov was clean. His uniform sat correctly on his shoulders, not as armor but as habit. He had the posture of a man who did not need to prove authority because he assumed it was already understood. They sat across from each other in a small office warmed by a single stove. A portrait of Stalin watched from the wall, not looming, just present, like a fact. "You are an engineer," Gromov said, consulting a thin folder. "Hydrology." "I was," Ivan replied. Gromov nodded, as if this were a clarification rather than a correction. "Do you know why you are here?" Ivan hesitated. There were many correct answers and none of them were safe. "For counter-revolutionary activity," he said finally. "Yes," Gromov agreed, without irony. "And more broadly, for correction." Ivan looked up. Gromov noticed. "That word bothers people," the major continued calmly. "Correction. They imagine punishment. But punishment is inefficient. What we do here is more constructive." He gestured vaguely, as if indicating not the camp but history itself. Men arrive broken in the wrong places. Or unbroken where they should be flexible. We apply pressure. Heat. Time. You forge them, Ivan said before he could stop himself. Gromov smiled, not triumphantly, but with relief. Exactly. You understand. Ivan did not answer. He was watching Gromov's hands, clean nails, steady fingers. These were not the hands of a sadist. They were the hands of a man who signed documents and slept afterward. I read your file, Gromov continued. Educated. Observant. That can be dangerous, or useful. He closed the folder. There are roles here that require a certain sensitivity. Speaking to other inmates. Not informing in the crude sense, but guiding. Listening. Reporting tendencies. Ivan felt something tighten in his chest. Not fear, calculation. And in return, he asked. Gromov did not pretend to misunderstand. Lighter labor. Better rations. A warmer bunk. Survival, in other words. The stove clicked softly as it cooled. Ivan thought of the men coughing in the barracks. Thought of the river under ice. And if I refuse? Gromov shrugged. Then you will work until you are no longer able. This is not a threat, Korny V. It is arithmetic. For the first time, Ivan saw uncertainty flicker, just briefly, behind the major's eyes. Not doubt in the system, but concern over inefficiency. You could help us make this place better, Gromov said quietly. Even humane. Ivan stood. May I think about it? Of course, Gromov said. Thinking is one of the things we are trying to preserve. Outside, the cold reclaimed Ivan immediately. He walked back to the barracks slowly, as if testing the ground. That night, when he closed his eyes, he did not choose a memory of warmth. Instead, he replayed the conversation word for word, storing it carefully, like evidence he might one day need against himself. The dam did not look like an idea that could kill people. It looked temporary, wooden scaffolds, iron ribs, concrete poured too quickly and already scarred by frost. From a distance it resembled a wound hastily stitched, the kind doctors warned you not to touch. Ivan understood it at once. The river had been forced to kneel, but it had not agreed. Each morning, prisoners were marched down to the construction site in lines that resembled measurements more than human formations. Guards shouted, dogs barked, steam rose from mouths and collars. Work began without explanation. It ended without closure. Ivan was assigned to a surveying brigade. Someone, somewhere, had read his file again. He carried instruments that had not been calibrated properly. He wrote numbers in a notebook that would later be copied inaccurately by someone who did not understand them. The margin of error grew quietly, like rot. He tried to explain. First to the brigade leader, a former schoolteacher whose face had collapsed inward, as if retreating from memory. The pressure will accumulate under the ice, Ivan said, pointing at the frozen current. The foundation is not deep enough. In spring, the man interrupted, either we'll be free or dead. That ended the conversation. Ivan began to keep two sets of calculations, the official ones, and the true ones, which he stored in his head. At night, he rebuilt the dam there, every beam, every misalignment, every lie. He could feel the failure already. It was not dramatic. It was patient. Major Gromov visited the site twice a week. He walked slowly, asked questions, nodded at answers. He never raised his voice. When a man collapsed, he looked away, not out of cruelty, but because stopping would disrupt the rhythm of work. One afternoon, Gromov stopped beside Ivan. You've noticed flaws, he said, without accusation. Yes. And you've chosen not to escalate. Ivan did not deny it. Gromov leaned closer to the riverbank. Do you know what the state fears most? He asked. Sabotage? Rebellion? He straightened. Waste. Lost potential. Projects abandoned halfway. He looked at Ivan carefully. You can prevent that. That night, Ivan dreamed of water-filling rooms that had no doors. Ivan accepted the extra bread on the third week. He told himself it was temporary. The conversations came next. Not interrogations, talks. Men approached him quietly, sometimes asked nothing at all. He listened. He nodded. He did not encourage hope. He did not extinguish it either. When Gromov asked what he had learned, Ivan spoke in abstractions. Fatigue. Low morale. Fear of spring flooding. All of it true. None of it lethal. In return, his work assignment changed. Less hauling. More measuring. He was allowed to speak openly at the site, though never in writing. This made him dangerous. Other prisoners noticed. Some avoided him. Some sought him out. A few looked at him with naked hatred. One man, a former accountant with cracked lips, spat near Ivan's feet. "Better fed rat," he said. Ivan did not respond. He stored the words. At night, his memory exercises grew harder. He began to forget small things, the exact layout of his old apartment, the smell of his wife's hair. He compensated by replaying the river again and again, forcing its details to remain precise. He told himself, "I am still choosing." But the dam loomed larger each day, and with it, the lie. One evening, Gromov summoned him again. "The Foundation report," the major said. "I want your honest assessment." Ivan hesitated. "If it fails," he said slowly, "it will not fail cleanly." Gromov waited. "There will be no warning. Men will be trapped. The water will not distinguish between guilt and usefulness." Gromov nodded, as if this were unfortunate but acceptable. "And if we reinforce? You will delay the failure. At the cost of more lives later." The major folded his hands. "You, rethinking like a scientist," he said. "I need you to think like a citizen." Ivan looked at the portrait on the wall. The eyes did not move. "Citizens die too," Ivan said. "Yes," Gromov agreed gently. "But not in vain." For the first time, Ivan felt something close to panic, not fear of death, but fear of meaning imposed from outside. That night, the river groaned beneath the ice. The river did not wait for spring. It happened in February, when everyone believed the cold had sealed things in place. The night was clear, brittle, full of stars that seemed sharpened by frost. The kind of night that promised stability. Ivan was awake when the first sound came, not a crack, but a low, spreading moan, like wood bending somewhere deep underground. He sat up. Others heard it too. A man cursed. Someone laughed nervously. The sound came again, closer now, multiplied. Then the ground trembled. Guards shouted. Floodlights snapped on, bleaching the darkness into hard angles. Men ran without knowing where. Someone slipped on ice and did not get up. Ivan was already moving toward the scaffolding. He saw what others could not, the way the ice lifted unevenly, the pressure lines radiating from the base of the dam. The wrong geometry revealing itself at last. Water punched through a seam with explosive calm. It was not violent at first. It was confident. "Back!" Ivan shouted, his voice tearing out of him. "Leave the lower supports." Some listened. Some did not. A guard fired into the air. The sound vanished into chaos. Ivan reached a man pinned under a beam. They worked together, hands numb, breath raw, until the beam shifted enough to pull him free. The man sobbed once, then ran. Someone yelled for Ivan. "The east support," a voice cried. "If we brace it," Ivan looked. If they reinforced it now, the structure would hold. Not forever. Long enough. Long enough to bury the truth deeper. He imagined the report. Temporary failure averted. Additional labor required. He imagined new transports arriving, faces unprepared, bodies uncounted. Another groan surged through the riverbed. Ivan turned away from the support. Instead, he ran along the collapsing edge, shouting, dragging men back, ignoring orders, ignoring weapons pointed vaguely in his direction. He did not think in terms of heroism. He thought only of proximity, who was close enough to touch. The dam gave up with a sound like breath escaping lungs. Ice shattered. Water surged. Timber twisted and vanished. The river reclaimed its direction. When it was over, the silence was worse than noise. The project lay broken. Men lay scattered. Some did not move. Ivan stood knee-deep in water that flowed correctly now, downstream, indifferent. He was shivering violently, but not from cold. They questioned him for 3 days. There was no beating. That was the most frightening part. Gromov conducted the final interview himself. He looked older. Or perhaps simply revealed. "You understood the mechanics," Gromov said. "Witnesses confirm this." "Yes. You chose not to act." "I chose to act differently." Gromov studied him for a long moment. "Do you know how many resources were lost?" he asked. "Do you know what this failure represents?" Ivan did not answer. "It represents disorder," Gromov continued. "Which leads to doubt. Which leads to collapse. And what do the dead represent?" Ivan asked. Gromov's jaw tightened. "Statistics," he said at last. Ivan felt something settle inside him then, not relief, not despair, but clarity. They added 5 years to his sentence. The dam was declared a result of sabotage and natural forces. No names were published. Gromov's report emphasized resilience, the necessity of vigilance, the promise of future projects built on improved principles. Ivan returned to general labor. The extra bread stopped. The conversations ended. At night, he rebuilt the collapse in his mind, not as punishment, but as record. Every sound. Every choice. He forced himself to remember the faces of those he pulled free, and those he did not reach. This was his new work. After the collapse, time changed its texture. Before, days had edges, roll call, work, hunger, sleep. Now they blurred into one another, as if someone had rubbed the calendar with a wet thumb until the numbers vanished. Ivan worked wherever there was need for a body rather than a mind. He hauled timber, cleared debris, dug trenches that froze overnight and had to be dug again in the morning. His hands cracked and healed badly. His back developed a pain that never left. No one spoke to him about the dam. Not the guards. Not the prisoners. Silence was the final report. Some of the men he had pulled from the water nodded to him when they passed. Others avoided his eyes. One man, a young Ukrainian with permanently red hands, whispered once as they stood in line, "You chose us." Ivan did not know how to answer that. The words felt too large, too clean, for what he remembered: panic, cold, weight, shouting. Choosing had not felt like choosing. It had felt like motion. Major Gromov stopped visiting the site after the investigation ended. Rumors filtered down slowly, distorted by distance: promotion, reassignment, commendation for decisive leadership during crisis. Ivan accepted this without surprise. At night, his memory exercises grew harder again, not because of forgetting, but because remembering began to hurt. He remembered his wife's voice now, but it came with the knowledge that she might have learned to live without it. He remembered his work, but without the certainty that it had mattered. So he shifted his method. Instead of rebuilding the past, he began recording the present, each day selecting one small, precise detail to preserve: the way frost feathered the inside of the barack window, the rhythm of a man coughing 3 bunks away, the sound of boots passing without stopping. If he could not protect meaning, he would protect accuracy. This, too, was resistance. Ivan saw Gromov again 2 years later. The major, now colonel, was visiting as part of an inspection tour. He looked heavier, more settled into his uniform, like a man whose body had adapted to authority. They met by chance, or something pretending to be chance, near the administrative building. Gromov recognized him immediately. "Korney V," he said, with something like genuine warmth. "Still alive?" "Yes." "I am glad," Gromov said. "You were difficult. But sincere." Ivan said nothing. They stood in silence for a moment, watching prisoners cross the yard in lines that made sense only from above. "You know," Gromov continued, "the revised dam project was approved last year. New location. Better planning. Fewer losses." Ivan looked at him. "And you believe that?" he asked. Gromov did not bristle. "I believe," he said carefully, "that progress requires correction. Errors are inevitable. What matters is that the system learns." "And does it?" Ivan asked. Gromov hesitated. For the first time, truly hesitated. "I think," he said slowly, "that it learns enough." He adjusted his gloves. "Survival is not purity, Korney V. It is participation." Then he nodded once and walked away. Ivan watched him go with a strange calm. There was no hatred left in him now. Hatred required energy, and the camp took that first. What remained was something colder and more durable. Ivan Kornev was released on a Tuesday. There was no ceremony. No apology. No acknowledgement beyond a stamp pressed onto paper that already smelled old. The guard who handed it to him did not look at his face. "You re-free," the guard said, as one might say, "you may leave the room." Ivan stepped outside the gate and waited for something to happen. Nothing did. The world beyond the camp was smaller than he remembered. The sky lower. The snow dirtier. Even the air felt cautious, as if it had learned to avoid attention. He walked to the nearest settlement. People passed him without curiosity. A man with his posture, his clothes, his eyes did not require explanation in this country. At the employment office, they scanned his papers and shook their heads. "No positions," the woman said. "Not for your specialty." "What specialty?" Ivan asked. She looked at him, then away. He slept in a boarding house that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wood. At night, he woke expecting the barracks, the coughs, the count. Instead, there was silence, vast, indifferent. Freedom, he discovered, did not replace captivity. It merely removed its structure. Weeks passed. He learned where to stand in lines. When to speak. When not to. He learned that people avoided questions not out of fear, but habit. Fear had simply trained them well. One evening, he unfolded a newspaper someone had left behind. A small article caught his eye. State hydrological project completed ahead of schedule. There was a photograph. A dam. Concrete clean and white. Men in coats shaking hands. Among them stood Colonel Gromov, smiling slightly, as if aware that smiles should never be excessive. Ivan folded the paper carefully and placed it back. That night, for the first time in years, he did not perform his memory exercise. Instead, he let the present exist without recording it. This frightened him more than the camp ever had. Ivan traveled north. He did not know why at first. The decision came without explanation, like an old reflex resurfacing. Only when he stood on the riverbank did he understand. It was the same river. Or close enough that the difference no longer mattered. The water moved steadily, obedient to gravity and geography. No ice. No scaffolding. No men forcing it to behave. Ivan stood there for a long time. He realized something then. something that made his chest tighten not with grief, but with a sharp, almost angry clarity. The camp had not failed to break him. It had succeeded in something far more precise. It had taught him to see. He saw the dam in the distance, though it was not there. Saw the men who would never stand by this river again. Saw Gromov's hands, clean and steady, signing papers that would outlive them both. And he saw himself, not as a survivor, not as a victim, but as a witness. That was the system's mistake. They had allowed him to remember. Ivan knelt and touched the water. It was cold. Real. Indifferent. The river did not care about justice. Or progress. Or correction. It flowed because it could do nothing else. Ivan stood and stepped back. He would not write his story. He would not speak it aloud. The world did not need another testimony it could politely ignore. Instead, he would carry it, intact, precise, unredeemed. Not as forgiveness. Not as hope. But as proof that a man could pass through the machine, obey none of its meanings, and still emerge capable of feeling the cold of water on his skin and knowing exactly what it was. The river flowed on. Ivan turned away.